On a previous search of the same stream, the grave did not exist. That is the single most chilling detail to emerge from the Nancy Guthrie investigation in 132 days. Not the discovery of a grave. The discovery that a specific location, a stream bed in the Mariposa region of Sonora, Mexico, just west of Nogales near the Arizona border, had been searched before. And on that previous search, there was nothing there. And then an anonymous caller told a Mexican search collective that Nancy Guthrie's remains were in that stream, in a grave. And when the searchers went back to look at the specific location the caller described, they found that a grave now existed where none had existed before. It had been dug recently. Nancy was not in it. The search came up empty for her specifically, but the grave was there, new, recent, in a location that had previously contained nothing. This is Forensic Disconnect. Day 132. And today we are going into the most significant and most disturbing geographic development in this investigation since the case began. An international search, a volunteer collective in Mexico, 25 unmarked graves and the remains of at least 32 people, a tip that has gotten more specific over time, and a grave that appeared where one had not existed before. Before we go further, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Day 132. Subscribe. Let's start with the timeline. Because the specific sequence of events, how this tip arrived, what happened when it was first acted on, and how it evolved, is the foundation for understanding why this development matters. In early May 2026, approximately 70 days after Nancy disappeared, a Mexican volunteer organization called Buscando Corazones Nogales received an anonymous phone call. The name translates to Looking for Hearts Nogales. The group's mission is to search for the remains of missing persons in the border region of Sonora, Mexico, a region that has, for years, been a site where the disappeared of multiple countries are found in unmarked graves. The anonymous caller told the group's leader, Ramona Guadalupe Ayala Ortiz, that an American woman's remains were buried in the Mariposa area, an arroyo, a dry stream bed west of Nogales, near the Arizona-Mexico border strip. The caller did not name Nancy Guthrie explicitly in every account, but the description, an American woman, missing since early 2026, buried near the border, pointed directly at the most prominent missing American woman in the country. The group acted on the tip. On May 16th, they conducted a search of the area the caller described. They coordinated with the Sonora State Commission for the search of missing persons. Municipal and state security forces provided protection for the volunteers. The first search found nothing connected to Nancy, but then something happened that has not received the attention it deserves. The anonymous caller called back, and the second call provided a more specific location. Within the same general area, the Mariposa region, but more precise, more detailed, as if the caller was refining their information, correcting an error, or testing the searcher's response to the first search before providing the real location. On June 10th, the group conducted a second search based on the more specific location, and this is where the detail that should be the headline of this entire story emerges. Ayala Ortiz told the Mexican outlet El Imparcial that during a prior operation, before this specific tip, the group had searched part of this same area. And the specific grave that is now connected to the Nancy tip did not exist during that prior operation. It did not exist, and now it does. Let's sit with what that means. A specific location in a stream bed in the Mariposa region. Searched before, at some point prior to the current tip, and found to contain nothing. And now, when the group returns based on the anonymous caller's more specific information, there is a grave there. New. Recently dug. Nancy was not in it. The search for her specifically came up empty, but someone dug a grave in a location that was previously empty, recently enough that the difference between the prior search and this search is documented by the same search group, the same leader, working the same general area. What does that mean? There are several possibilities, and each of them is significant in its own way. The first possibility is that this is connected to ongoing criminal activity in the border region that has nothing to do with Nancy Guthrie. The Mariposa area is, by Ayala Ortiz's own account, a region where Buscando Corazones Nogales has found more than 25 unmarked graves and the remains of at least 32 people from searches conducted between April and May alone. This is an active dumping ground for human remains, connected to cartel violence, to the broader crisis of disappearances along the U.S.-Mexico border, to a humanitarian catastrophe that predates and is independent of the Nancy Guthrie case. A new grave appearing in this area could simply be evidence of that ongoing activity. Someone else, victim of someone else, buried by someone else, for reasons that have nothing to do with Tucson, Arizona. The second possibility is more specific to this case. If the anonymous caller has genuine knowledge, if the caller knows something about where Nancy actually is, and the first call was either intentionally vague or simply imprecise, then the caller's second, more specific call could represent a correction, an attempt to provide the actual location. And the new grave at that location could be connected to the Nancy investigation specifically, even if Nancy herself is not in this particular grave. The third possibility is the most disturbing. If someone connected to Nancy's disappearance is aware that searchers are looking in this area, if the anonymous tip has reached people who have a stake in what is found or not found in the Mariposa region, then a new grave appearing in a previously searched and empty location could represent an attempt to manage what investigators find. To place something, or someone, in a location that searchers have already cleared, in order to either misdirect future searches or to dispose of evidence in a location that appears to have already been ruled out. Each of these possibilities is speculative. None of them has been confirmed. Ayala Ortiz's group is continuing to search. A third operation is planned for June 16th or 17th, moving to another nearby waterway in the same general region. But the specific detail, a grave that did not exist before, in a location connected to an anonymous tip about Nancy Guthrie, found during a search that did not find Nancy, is now part of the public record of this investigation. And it deserves more analytical attention than the headline "Searched Comes Up Empty" has given it. Now let's talk about the scale of what Buscando Corazones Nogales has found in this region overall. Because the 25 unmarked graves and 32 recovered remains are not a footnote to the Nancy Guthrie story. They are the specific geographic and human context in which this tip arrived, and understanding that context is essential to understanding what kind of place the Mariposa region is. 25 unmarked graves, at least 32 individuals, found by a volunteer organization, not by government forensic teams with the resources of a federal investigation, but by a collective of people who searched the desert because the families of the disappeared have nowhere else to turn. This is the specific reality of the U.S.-Mexico border region in Sonora. People disappear. Their families do not get the kind of national attention that Nancy Guthrie's disappearance has received. There is no NBC anchor daughter going on television every morning. There is no $1.2 million reward. There is no FBI laboratory at Quantico processing DNA evidence. There is a volunteer group searching stream beds with hand tools and the assistance of state security forces, finding the remains of people whose families have been waiting, sometimes for years, for any answer at all. Buscando Corazones Nogales does this work continuously. The anonymous tip about Nancy Guthrie arrived into an organization that was already searching this region for other reasons, for other families, for other disappeared people. The tip did not create the search. It directed an existing search toward a specific location, in the context of an organization whose entire purpose is finding people who have been buried in unmarked graves in this exact terrain. 25 graves, 32 people. And Nancy Guthrie's name is now connected, through an anonymous tip, to this specific landscape of disappearance. Now let's talk about the jurisdictional reality of what is happening. Because the specific limitations on what U.S. federal law enforcement can do in this situation are significant, and they explain why a volunteer organization, rather than the FBI, is the entity conducting these searches. The FBI has no jurisdiction in Mexico. TMZ's law enforcement sources confirmed this directly. FBI agents were not dispatched to participate in the Mariposa searches because the FBI cannot operate as a law enforcement agency on Mexican soil. The FBI can request cooperation from Mexican authorities. It can share information. It can coordinate, as TMZ's February reporting confirmed the FBI did when it contacted Mexican federal law enforcement officials about the possibility that Nancy had been taken across the border. But the FBI cannot send agents to dig in a streambed in Sonora. That work, if it happens at all, is done by Mexican authorities, by Mexican state security forces, or by volunteer organizations like Buscando Corazones Nogales, operating with whatever security and coordination Mexican state agencies provide. Sheriff Nanos's statement on June 11th reflects this jurisdictional reality precisely. He said the Pima County Sheriff's Department is aware of the reports regarding the anonymous tip. He said the department has not been contacted by Mexican authorities. And he said the investigation remains active and ongoing, and they will continue to follow up on any credible information. Has not been contacted by Mexican authorities. That is the specific gap in this story. An anonymous tip reached a Mexican volunteer organization. That organization conducted 2 searches. The searches produced a specific, documented, and disturbing finding: a grave that did not exist before. And the U.S. law enforcement agency leading the official investigation into Nancy Guthrie's disappearance learned about all of this from the same news reports that the public learned about it from. Not through official channels, through El Impartial, through TMZ, through the same international news cycle that everyone else is reading. This is the specific texture of an investigation that has an international dimension, but does not have the cross-border investigative infrastructure that a case of this magnitude might be expected to have. The FBI contacted Mexican officials in February. TMZ reported that contact, and Nanos acknowledged at the time that the FBI would look into the Mexico possibility. 4 months later, an anonymous tip reaches a volunteer organization, conducts 2 searches, finds a grave that didn't exist before, and the official U.S. investigation finds out from the news. That gap matters, and it is part of why this development, even though the search for Nancy specifically came up empty, is significant. Now let's connect this to what credentialed experts have already said about where Nancy might be. Because the Mariposa development does not arrive in a vacuum. It arrives in the context of theories that multiple experts have already put forward. Theories that this development makes more specific and more geographically concrete. Barbara Butcher, the veteran forensic investigator who spent decades at the New York City Medical Examiner's Office, said in late May that she believed Nancy likely died of shock or a medical condition shortly after being taken, and that the kidnapper probably took her body into the desert and buried her. The desert. Butcher did not specify which desert or how far from Tucson. The Sonoran Desert extends across southern Arizona and into Sonora, Mexico. The Mariposa region, west of Nogales, is within the Sonoran Desert, within the broader landscape that Butcher's theory describes. John Bueller's local worker theory, that Nancy was targeted by someone who had legitimate access to her property and made the connection to Savannah's wealth, does not preclude that person having connections to, or operating within, the border region. Tucson is approximately 70 miles from Nogales. A local worker with the specific knowledge of Nancy's property could plausibly have connections to the broader Sonora region, family, associates, criminal networks that operate across the border. And the specific detail from February that the FBI contacted Mexican federal law enforcement regarding the possibility that Nancy had been taken across the border establishes that this possibility has been on the FBI's radar since the early weeks of the investigation. It was not dismissed. Nanos said there was no indication of it at the time, but acknowledged the FBI would look into it. 4 months later, an anonymous tip leads searchers to the Mariposa region. The search for Nancy comes up empty, but a new grave is found where one did not exist before. The geography of this case may extend across the border in ways that the official investigation has not yet publicly confirmed. Now let's talk about what comes next. Because Ayala Ortiz has confirmed that Buscando Corazones Nogales is not stopping. A third search operation is planned for June 16th or 17th, moving to another nearby waterway in the same general region. The anonymous caller provided information that got more specific over 2 calls. If there is a third call, if the caller continues to provide information, and if that information continues to get more specific, the trajectory of this story may not be over. Or the caller may not call again. The tip may have been a hoax or misdirection or genuine but mistaken information from someone who does not actually know where Nancy is. What is documented is this: an anonymous tip, 2 searches, a grave that appeared where one had not existed before, 25 unmarked graves and 32 recovered remains in the broader region, a 3rd search planned, and a U.S. law enforcement agency that learned about all of this from the news. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old, 5 feet tall, silver hair and blue eyes. She has been missing for 132 days. Her home is approximately 70 miles from the area where searchers are now looking. The DNA is at Quantico. The blockchain is being traced. Enton has a positive theory he has not fully disclosed. And now there is a stream bed in Sonora, Mexico, where a grave appeared that was not there before. The investigation continues. The searches continue. And somewhere, in the desert, in a stream bed, in a location that has not yet been searched, the answer to where Nancy Guthrie is may exist. Let me go deeper into what Buscando Corazones Nogales actually is, and why their work matters far beyond this single case. Because understanding the organization helps explain both why they were the ones to receive this tip and what their continued search means. Buscando Corazones Nogales is part of a broader movement of volunteer search collectives that has emerged across Mexico over the past decade, primarily composed of mothers, sisters, and other family members of the disappeared who have taken on the work of searching for remains because official search efforts have been insufficient. These groups, Madres Buscadoras de Sonora, Buscadoras de la Frontera, and others, operate with a specific methodology. They receive tips, often anonymous, often from people who have direct knowledge of where bodies were disposed of, sometimes from former cartel members, sometimes from people seeking some form of redemption, sometimes from people simply trying to do right by families who deserve to know what happened to their loved ones. The methodology is specific and grim. Searchers probe the ground with metal rods, looking for the specific resistance and smell that indicates a clandestine grave. They work in teams, covering systematic grids of terrain. When they find something, they document it, often photograph it, and coordinate with whatever forensic resources are available. Sometimes Mexican state forensic teams, sometimes nothing more than their own documentation efforts. The fact that Buscando Corazones Nogales has found 25 unmarked graves and 32 sets of remains in the Mariposa area from searches conducted between April and May alone, in just that one region in just those 2 months, tells you something about the scale of what this organization is dealing with. This is not an unusual or exceptional discovery for them. This is the ordinary, ongoing reality of their work. When the anonymous tip about Nancy Guthrie arrived, it arrived to an organization that already knew this terrain, that had already been searching it, that had already found dozens of bodies in it. The tip did not direct them to unfamiliar ground. It directed them to ground they had already been working, and told them that an American woman's remains might be among what they would find there. Ayala Ortiz's specific quote, that the caller told them the woman's remains were in a grave over a stream, and this time we came to explore this stream that we failed to explore in the first intervention, reveals something important about the methodology. The first search on May 16th was based on the initial tip. It covered an area, but apparently did not include this specific stream. The second call provided the more specific information, this stream specifically, and the June 10th search went there, and found a grave that had not existed during a previous search of the broader area. This is the specific texture of how these searches work. Broad area first. Then more specific information narrows the search. And the narrowing process itself, the fact that the second call provided information specific enough to direct searchers to a location they had not previously covered, suggests either genuine knowledge being incrementally shared or a deliberate process of guiding searchers toward a specific location through multiple contacts. Now let's talk about what the timing of the anonymous tip's first call tells us. Because the first call came in early May, approximately 70 days after Nancy disappeared. That specific timing is worth examining. 70 days is more than 2 months. It is long enough for initial investigative momentum to have produced significant public information about the case. The DNA evidence, the blood at the scene, the masked figure on camera, the ransom notes, the FBI's involvement, the reward amount. By early May, anyone following this case, anyone with access to the extensive media coverage, would know the basic outline of what happened and what investigators are looking for. It is also long enough for someone with actual knowledge of what happened to Nancy to have processed that knowledge, made decisions about it, and potentially decided to act on it, whether through guilt, through fear, through a desire to help, or through a desire to manipulate the investigation. The specific window of 70 days does not definitively point toward any of these possibilities, but it places the tip within a time frame where someone could plausibly have specific knowledge connected to the actual disposal of Nancy's remains if that disposal occurred across the border, and where that someone might have specific reasons, 70 days later, for reaching out to a Mexican search collective rather than to U.S. authorities directly. Why a Mexican search collective rather than the FBI tip line? If someone has genuine knowledge about a location in Mexico, contacting a Mexican organization that operates in that specific terrain, that has the local knowledge, the security coordination, and the physical capability to search a specific streambed in Sonora, might be a more direct path to having that location actually searched than calling 1-800-CALL-FBI, which would require the FBI to coordinate with Mexican authorities, navigate jurisdictional issues, and potentially take much longer to act. If someone wanted a specific location searched quickly, calling Buscando Corazones Nogales, an organization known for rapidly mobilizing searches based on tips, with established security coordination with Sonora state authorities, might be the fastest way to get boots on the ground at that location. That is speculation, but it is speculation grounded in the specific operational reality of how these two systems, U.S. federal law enforcement and Mexican volunteer search collectives, actually function. Now let's go deeper into the specific significance of the new grave, because this detail deserves the most careful analytical treatment in this entire story, and the news coverage so far has largely treated it as a footnote to the searched comes up empty for Nancy headline. A grave that did not exist during a previous search and exists now in a location connected to an anonymous tip about Nancy Guthrie's remains found during a search conducted specifically because of that tip. This is not a neutral fact. It requires an explanation, and every possible explanation is significant. If the new grave contains the remains of someone unconnected to Nancy, a victim of the broader cartel violence and disappearance crisis in the Sonora border region, then its presence is a coincidence of timing. Someone was buried there recently, for reasons entirely unrelated to Nancy Guthrie, in the same general time frame that an anonymous tip directed searchers to look in this area for Nancy. Coincidences happen, but the specific coincidence of a new grave appearing in a location connected to an active tip about a missing person, discovered during a search prompted by that tip, in an area that has already produced 25 other graves, is the kind of coincidence that warrants further investigation rather than dismissal. If the new grave is connected to Nancy's case in some way, even if her remains are not in it, the connection could take several forms. It could be a grave dug to receive evidence connected to the crime, not Nancy's body but something else, personal effects, materials used in the abduction, anything that someone wanted disposed of in a location far from Tucson, in terrain known for absorbing things that are buried and not found. It could also be, and this is the most speculative possibility, a grave dug as a decoy. If someone is aware that an anonymous tip has directed searchers to this area and that searchers will dig where the tip points, creating a new grave in that location, even an empty one or one containing unrelated remains, could serve to validate the broader narrative that Nancy is somewhere in this region, directing future search efforts toward the border area and away from wherever she is actually located. None of these possibilities can be confirmed from the information currently available. What can be said is that the specific detail, a grave appearing where one did not exist before in the context of an active tip about Nancy Guthrie, is a fact that the investigation should be taking seriously, and that deserves more analytical attention than it has received in the broader coverage of this story. The Pima County Sheriff's Department has not been contacted by Mexican authorities. The FBI has no jurisdiction in Mexico. Buscando Corazones Nogales is planning a third search for June 16th or 17th. And in a streambed in the Mariposa region of Sonora, Mexico, There is a grave that was not there before, and Nancy Guthrie was not in it. What was? Day 132. The investigation continues. The searches continue. The grave that did not exist before is now part of the record. If you have any information about Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, contact the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI, 1-800-225-5324. Submit tips at tips.fbi.gov. Call the Pima County Sheriff's Department at 520-351-4900. The combined reward is over $1.2 million, completely anonymous. Hit the like button. Subscribe to Forensic Disconnect. Drop a comment. What do you think the new grave means? We read every single comment. A grave appeared where one had not existed before. Nancy was not in it. We will be back tomorrow.